Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our third and final webinar in our SF China series. We have a really great session lined up for you today, and there's plenty of opportunities to explore the brief and answer any questions that you might have. So if you don't know me already, my name is Olivia Hinkin, and I am the Network and Outreach Officer here at StoryFutures. I'm the key point of contact for companies in our network. So if anyone feels they have any questions in the run up to the application deadline, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll put my contact details in the chat shortly. So this session is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel after the event. And we already have 2 of our previous webinars in this SF China series up on there. So please do check these out if you'd like to catch up on the last ones. They have a lot more information about the Chinese market and some of the research we've done already. And we have an action-packed agenda today, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen to show you that. So lots of things going on from our wonderful panel, and we have a full 30 minutes for questions at the end. So please be sure to post any questions you might have for the panelists in this Q&A window rather than in the chat window. But feel free to use the chat window for any comments or networking or general chat. And for any companies who might be looking for a partner or a collaborator for this application, we're going to send out an email after the event with a form for you to log your contact details and the kind of partner you're looking for and any skills you're looking for. So this is going to be accessible to everyone who signed up today. So if you'd like to opt in, it will enable people to reach out to you directly. So I think that's it for housekeeping stuff. Let me introduce our panel. So we have with us today James Bennett, the Director of StoryFutures, Will Saunders, our Chief Creative Officer at StoryFutures, Lawrence Childs, who's Head of Digital Services at the National Gallery, Jonathan Knuth, who's CEO of Focal Point VR and previous StoryLab winners, and also our StoryLab producer, Kylie Bryant. So I'm now going to hand over to Kylie, who's going to tell you a bit more about StoryFutures China.
Hi everyone, welcome and thanks for joining. It's great to see you all here. I hope, like me, you're feeling the sunshine and the more positive news about coming out of lockdown, so we can get on with things. But we've been rocketing along here at StoryFutures, and I'll just introduce a little bit about StoryFutures. Many of you might know, so I'll keep this quick. And then our StoryFutures China project, and hand over to James Bennett, the Director of StoryFutures, to talk to you in more detail about StoryFutures China research and development and innovation in the international context. So StoryFutures is part of an £80 million investment in the creative industries, and it's part of the Creative Industries Cluster program. I'm going to start my slideshow just so that you can see as I'm talking. Sorry about that. So the aim of the Creative Industries Cluster program is to fuel growth through research and development. And you'll hear a lot about how research and development underpins this StoryLab application process and what you're applying for. There's 9 clusters across the UK. But what is important to know is that we are the largest creative cluster outside of London. And although London is not within our cluster, as you may be aware of, companies who are based in London can apply to this funding round if you are in partnership with companies or with investment into the cluster. And we'll talk more about that at the end of this presentation. So we're aiming at StoryFutures in our cluster to drive innovation in story form, in next generation technologies, and to support SMEs in growing in this area. And part of growth is in using new technologies and expanding your business through research and development. And part of that also includes international collaboration and ideally export opportunities. And that's where StoryFutures China comes in. It's an additional funding opportunity to StoryFutures and for us to pass on to the SMEs within our cluster to expand your business in an international context. So a quick overview of StoryFutures China. Our lead challenge setter on this project is the National Gallery, and we'll be introducing you to Lawrence Childs at the National Gallery, who can speak more about their involvement in this project. But we're aiming to look at ways that we can measurably enhance visitor experience in cultural institutions in the UK, in the case of the UK and the National Gallery, with a partner in Shanghai. And so that we can enable transnational exchange and export of immersive technologies. The opportunity is a £170,000 production budget. This is the largest production budget we have had the opportunity to support companies with, and we're really excited. It means it will be almost a year-long project that we'll be working with you. And that's probably why I'm leading the introduction, because I'll be your key contact throughout that and hope to support you throughout the whole process as the producer on the project. There's significant in-kind R&Ds from our team, and we'll talk about that, and also from the National Gallery and our Chinese partners with a huge audience reach. So it's such a big opportunity. We're really excited about this project. And along with a big opportunity comes a lot of stakeholders. So I just wanted to give you an idea. We have our key partners here in the UK, the National Gallery, a partner in China, and a production company in China who is Foremost. And you can see more about them. Foremost presented at one of our previous workshops in the lead up to the announcement of this funding. And we have a huge team who's working on it. So it will be a cast of thousands, and it's important to consider that in your application and demonstrate how you are used to working with a wide range of stakeholders in a collaborative research and development process. So I think that's important to bear in mind when you're thinking about this project. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to James Bennett to talk to you a bit more in detail about R&D in an international context and what that all means. When I stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Charlie.
Sorry, I'm getting there. You'd think after all these Zoom events we've been running, I would do it immediately. Thank you.
Thanks, Carly. So as Carly set out, I'm James Bennett. I'm the director of StoryFutures, and what I want to do for a few minutes is give a bit of the context of where StoryFutures China as a research project with an amazing innovation opportunity is coming from. So I am also going to screen share so that I can remind myself of what I'm talking to. So hopefully many of you are here because you've seen the opportunity that we've posted out on our website and via social media, etc. The opportunity for creative businesses in Greater London and the Gateway cluster to London's immediate west is to produce a £170,000 production budget for creating an immersive experience that will play out in the National Gallery at home for audiences. So we're expecting this to have some COVID-proof thinking behind it, and ultimately in Shanghai. Coming on the journey with us is being part of helping us and being part of the journey to find the final location. We've had very detailed discussions with our partners Foremost Media and Tongji University, but also with the Shanghai Science and Technology Museum, of making these institutions come together. As Carly set out, you'll be supported by significant in-kind R&D time from our StoryFutures team, including dedicated child audience researchers who will be part of the project. And we'll come back to more detail about the brief itself, the creative brief for creating this experience, at the end of our session. What I want to do in the next couple of minutes is talk about the overarching aims of where the project comes from and what 170 grand R&D innovation project looks like if you're thinking about applying for this as a creative company. So, give you a tiny bit of background. The first important thing to note is that we, as StoryFutures, and this project is funded by both the National Gallery, putting in funding for this, but also from UK Research and Innovation and the Arts and Humanities Research Council, who have been over the last couple of years leading on a series of interventions in creating connections between the UK's creative and cultural industries and China. StoryFutures China is one of 8 projects funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, aimed at driving innovation and cross-collaboration between the two countries, because of the rapid growth of creative industries in China, and because of post-Brexit looking at markets that the UK's culture and creative industries can export to, but also because of it is not a straightforward process of exporting anywhere, and it's not a straightforward process of exporting to China. So what we're doing as StoryFutures here is providing a kind of framework and a runway for building an export opportunity for both the National Gallery and a creative company to work with China with a framework around you and funding around you that is about investing in some risk, investing in a new market, and investing in a new opportunity to learn how to do business with China and Shanghai in particular. And as being part of a cohort, we also have a lot of support from UKRI's Shanghai office, and also the Department of International Trade. So there's a lot of support on there and learning to be shared about, you know, how we can do these things. But along the way, we're essentially interested in, this is part of being a research project, and a research project with real practical outcomes that are creating new products, new services and jobs, but is underpinned by these 4 basic aims. We aim to create an innovative, immersive cultural experience that enhances audience engagement at the National Gallery as well as off-site. Secondly, we'll be developing understandings of the business models of transnational cultural exchange for immersive. So how do you export to China? What are the cultural and business opportunities and barriers to that? Thirdly, we'll be building a UX model that translates national experiences so that this experience that we create, first of all, for a UK audience in the National Gallery, can also travel for Chinese audiences at home or on a location in Shanghai. And in doing that, we'll be supporting the project with an audience research team that brings together psychology and social science research to understand and measure the importance of immersive technologies in the role of cultural institutions in both countries. I'll come back to these project aims shortly, in the context of thinking about the research framework we're working in. Our project overall has 3 kind of key deliverables: an immersive experience in the UK that plays out in the National Gallery and at home. Secondly, an adaptation of that immersive experience to be exported to Shanghai. And thirdly, which the StoryFutures team will really be leading on, a strategic framework report that looks at the business and user experience and audience design model for how you export to Shanghai and create cultural collaboration. So the results of this project will be shared as part of an innovation project that looks to build best practice and enable more countries to walk across the bridge to exporting and collaborating with China. Very briefly, a kind of sense of project timeline. We've been working with the National Gallery, Foremost, and our Shanghai partners over the last year to understand the parameters and shape the brief that has been put out already. And we're now looking to kick off into the production period, having worked to finalise what kind of experience we're after, what audience we're looking to serve, and a production timeline that aims to get experiences live in both institutions in Q1 next year. So that's the production timeline. And before I hand over to Lawrence to talk about why the National Gallery is involved, I just want to come back to this key thing about the commission that we're offering as StoryFutures China is an R&D commission. So it's a large production award, but it comes as an innovation award that is for working into this framework of the research questions I've set out. So I wanted to spend a couple of minutes thinking about what is R&D that should inform anybody thinking about applying for this opportunity. There is, for R&D, a kind of like formal definition called the Frascati definition that informs government policy and informs things like tax credits, which are important. But this definition, which refers to creative and systematic work to acquire new knowledge or devise new applications of existing knowledge to produce new or improve existing products, experience, or services. This definition from Frascati, it tends to focus on the sciences. And StoryFutures is part of the Creative Clusters program run by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and directly funded by the government's innovation policy as part of its industrial strategy, is about looking about what does R&D look like in a creative industries context, because it doesn't always meet this simple Frascati definition. And in fact, one of the things I want to emphasize to anybody considering taking part is actually a lot of what you do, if you're working in immersive, fits within an R&D agenda, because there are so much unknowns and because there is so much new process to be developed. So the R&D framework is about understanding that we're here to innovate, we're here to take risks, and we're here to explore the unknown, record and learn from both our successes and failures in doing that. There are some exclusions that definitely don't count as R&D, which are worth just noting. So just general education and training, just general purpose data collection, like simple user testing, doesn't count as R&D. Or finally, things like routine testing and general purpose data collection don't count as R&D. But aside from these exclusions, in a context of the StoryFutures China project, we've already set out a framework of the research questions we're interested in. The R of R&D is kind of set up. What we want to do is make those more specific with the creative ideas you come up with as companies to test these overarching research questions. And more importantly, get the D involved, the development. What does the product look like that tests these research questions? And what does the D as development as a business opportunity for you guys as businesses look like as a result of the StoryFutures China project? So these research questions, these 4 research questions that I talked about at the start, really should frame anybody's thinking about trying to apply for this opportunity, because ultimately the immersive experience that we create has to respond both to the brief, which is itself informed by these 4 research questions. To simplify that one step further, I just want to give you kind of like a non-technical definition of R&D, which might be thinking about it as production. If you're creating something, particularly in established worlds of film, television, games, you're moving through an established process. R&D might be thought about as trying to find new things to establish processes for. And in doing that, there's always a level of experimentation, risk, and failure. The last thing I'll say before I hand on to Lawrence is we've done this before with the gallery, and we've done this before with Focal Point in a hugely successful R&D collaboration called Virtual Veronese that Focal Point, Jonathan Youth, will talk to you about shortly. But this was framed as an audience insight research question to create an experience that understood what immersion looks like in the gallery and understood what immersion added to the National Gallery's offering to its audiences. So we worked with Lawrence and with Focal Point to develop this framework and create an experience that could be tested across different platforms and how immersion impacted the gallery's perception and the experience of immersion in the gallery with one particular painting. The project there that Jonathan will talk through experimented with different types of headsets and different types of immersion. And in doing so, we conducted research with over 300 people who took the experience, both interviews and surveys, and looked into questions around, simple, very simple data collection around user experience ratings. So, looking at positive impact, but aligning these with what type of experience people liked. So an experiment into a kind of information or story-led experiences, and also experiments into what kind of business models people wanted to pay for. And this prototyping experience then informs the gallery and Focal Point's decisions on what comes next after an R&D experiment. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do in all of this is produce learnings for you as businesses, learnings for the gallery as an institution, and as importantly, for our creative industries more widely, to develop world-leading immersive experiences that can be exported all over the world. And that's an exciting opportunity that we hope you'll join us on the journey for. And now I'm going to hand over to Lawrence from the National Gallery, who's going to talk a bit about why the gallery are joining us on that journey. Lawrence?
Brilliant. Thanks, James. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can all hear me okay. I'm just going to share my screen as well. If you bear with me 1 second. Always the very dramatic moment. I'm sure we're all used to now. Great, so hopefully you can all see that. So yeah, I'm just going to spend some time just sort of describing why the gallery is involved in this particular challenge, what it means for us, and sort of how that relates to the journey that we've been going on with digital at the gallery for the last couple of years, and how these projects have increasingly sort of moved towards thinking about innovation and working in this kind of R&D way that James has been talking about. Just as a reminder, because it's a building that's on the screen that we haven't been able to get in for quite a long time, or on and off, certainly over the last 12 months. But if you're not familiar, the National Gallery is in Trafalgar Square. And it was formed in 1824, just a bit of history. We're approaching our bicentennial, which is going to be quite a significant moment for us. And it houses the nation's collection of paintings in the Western European tradition from the late 13th century to the 20th century. And obviously it includes some rather big names in there, such as Leonardo, Renoir, Rubens, etc. And we have, the objective of enhancing the collection, caring for the collection, and providing access to the public and to the nation, and also increasingly, to a global audience. Just to give you a sort of idea of what digital means at the National Gallery, because it's significant in terms of thinking about partnerships and innovation. The team structure is, as it says on the screen there, we run the gamut from data and insight, product development, program management, content and innovation. And all that really is kind of understanding the audience, understanding those needs, working to create innovative experiences, and increasingly bringing in an innovation process into the mix. And that team's been in place for now just about 3 years, and increasingly, like I say, looking at new formats and processes has been part of what we do. In collaboration, it has to be said, with everyone else across the gallery, in terms of our curatorial teams, our scientific teams, and increasingly our learning teams, how we can actually all come together to create innovative experiences. And obviously this project, we've sort of centered it around working with the learning team and those younger audiences of 7 to 11. But just thinking about audience growth and digital audience growth, and obviously the impact the last 12 months has had, just sort of a slide here that kind of highlights where our growth has been happening across social media, but increasingly across other elements of our digital state. We've had, massive engagement, and I think that really is a signifier in terms of what the last 12 months has done for culture in general, in terms of access to culture and consuming of digital culture. I think that's a key thing to sort of have in our minds as we embark on this particular project. We as a gallery, we're in a good position to react to the COVID crisis with digital. Many institutions weren't in such a benefit, a key position. But we've actually seen a lot of growth, obviously, in those audiences and how people are willing to engage. And that's right through also to our online program, which has expanded, and how people are engaging with things like online events, whether that's webinars, such as this type of thing, or in our online courses, which we would have done normally at the gallery and now kind of increasingly being done online. And that isn't going to go away, that kind of access to a global audience. In general, you know, thinking about global audiences and tying what we do to those audiences, we've done some big exhibitions, and increasingly China is a place where we want to target, and we've got some significant projects that do look to export what we do to that audience. Virtual spaces has also been something that's been very significant. As you see on the screen there, people accessing either a genuine virtual piece of the gallery or kind of these more bespoke rooms has increased hugely over 12 months. And we're always looking for kind of ways to keep that level of engagement. And our formats are changing, thinking about who those target audience is that we're trying to reach, whether that's through video production, shown behind the scenes, looking at embarking on new platforms such as TikTok, and also just thinking about how people engage from a creative point of view with our collection, and also this sort of access to experts that we can provide. But working in partnership is key, is what we've always done over the last 3 years, as James says, and that was a key point in terms of doing digital projects at the gallery. We're a small team, which has expanded, but to do kind of large-scale projects and to involve on a bigger platform, and working in partnership was always going to be key. Virtual Veronese, as you can see on the screen here, started off as a research project, and I know Jonathan's going to go into a bit more detail about this, but it really highlights how a lot of our paintings have the ability to transport people through time and place, to get people a sense of a painting that was done for a particular audience at a particular time, actually a different place, such as a chapel, but is now hanging on the walls of the gallery in London. And I think transporting people is something that we look and talk about quite a lot in terms of the knowledge that we can bring about how one painting can tell lots of different stories. But increasingly, we are starting to involve user testing as part of what we do. And a project that, just to highlight that, in the last 12 months, has been something called Sensing the Unseen, Stepping into Gossard's Adoration. Again, taking one painting from the collection and really looking at it in depth. The key thing to mention about this particular project is how innovation was at the heart of it, and it was a real case study for the organisation to move much more into this area and to work collaboratively with other audiences. Over 12 months, we used and worked with 75 target audience members as part of the project, developing 50 concept ideas, 35 different prototypes, all tested to produce one exhibition. The physical exhibition opened for 7 days until we actually had to close it again, which is unfortunate, and fingers crossed the gallery will open again in the coming months, and the show will actually still be able to be seen. But we're increasingly also looking to do a digital version of this online as part of the experience. I think, but the strength of this particular project was how we collaborated with our audiences to kind of make sure that it was going to do the job that we wanted it to do. And as James says, many of these projects start with just one question, or kind of not really knowing where you're going, and having that one question is hard. Gossard just had one question, and it was a journey to kind of discover what it meant to put this type of immersive experience on. And we didn't know where we were going with that particular journey at the beginning, but what we've ended up with is something that's actually quite spectacular, and as I say, has had the strength of working with audiences to develop that. The other thing to mention about the galleries is the National Gallery X, or NGX, and again, that's been running for the last 12 months in terms of the programme. It's a physical space. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to use it over the last few months, but it's a physical space dedicated to R&D. And it just sort of highlights really sort of how we are committed to looking at working in this particular way. In particular with NGX, which is looking at the galleries and museums of the future and what that might mean in terms of technology. But as a space to kind of think collaboratively, to work with creative partnerships, and to then work to see what we can do with testing with audiences, it shows our commitment into working in new ways and what we're trying to achieve. So in terms of the brief and what we're looking for with this particular challenge, it is at the heart of it, still continuing that line of R&D and working collaboratively and thinking about new audiences. With this particular brief, it's thinking about the permanent collection. and how that permanent collection can be used in this way. Veronese was a really interesting project for us about doing virtual experiences and headset experiences on the gallery floor. How can we make that work? Answering lots of questions on a practical level, really, about what it means to connect virtual spaces with paintings on the wall whilst you're actually on site. And I think this particular project allows us to go even further with that, thinking about the permanent collection and the visit, but also how that connects to a digital visit prior to arriving and afterwards. And then also, what does it mean for that global audience that I mentioned earlier? It's an opportunity to do something we aren't doing anywhere else. And the target audience of 7 to 11-year-olds is really a really interesting area for us in terms of thinking about families and thinking about family visits to the organisation. As I say, it's a really exciting project. We've worked with StoryFutures before. We've built a really good relationship, and we feel really confident that this is going to send us on a journey that will produce something that's incredibly exciting for the gallery and for audiences around the world. I think I shall pause there and back to Kylie.
Thanks, Lawrence. That's fantastic. Your sound went in and out, but we got all of it, except for the very last line, which was we're on the exciting journey. And let me tell you about the process and how we go about that journey from application through to delivery, because we talk a lot about StoryLab and what is a StoryLab. So let me just explain on the back of that. I think one thing that's become very clear through the presentation is, sorry, just one moment. Sorry, slight interruption in the office here, the home office. I think one thing that's become really clear is that it's an extremely collaborative process, and that collaboration starts, I believe, from the very outset of your application. So I'm just going to share my screen. And again, I'm not super fast at that. Sorry, I've shared it from where we were before, so I'm just going to skip straight through. My apologies. So just to pick up where I was talking, that StoryLab is it's more than a 2-day workshop. It really is a collaborative process. And at the heart of that process is 2 things. One is working with everybody that's involved. And so that includes working within the cluster and it's demonstrating investment into the cluster, but it also includes working with all the stakeholders. So very closely with the National Gallery. And as Lawrence outlined, the National Gallery team, it starts with his team and the digital team, but there is a whole host of people that you will need to work with throughout the National Gallery, our Chinese partners and StoryFutures team as well. But at the heart of that sits the story process. So in StoryLab starts with an online application, and 4 companies are selected to go through to our StoryLab workshop. And people think that StoryLab workshop is the end of what we mean by StoryLab, but after the workshop, 1 company is then selected as the production company, and StoryLab is still the ongoing process through the R&D and the production process to delivery, which is in February 2022. So the 2.5-day workshop is just the start of the StoryLab journey. And so why we do that is what we found is if you get through to this StoryLab workshop, you have a greater opportunity to speak directly with the National Gallery and to build your pitch. So with your applications, we're not expecting to see a full pitch or proposal. And I think that is a really key part of this process. You will have 2 full days to work with the National Gallery and develop your pitch so that there's a really great fit, because it is quite a journey and it is such a collaborative and challenging process, that we really want to get to know companies before embarking on this journey. And although our next speaker will be one of the successful StoryLab companies who've gone through the whole production process, if you want to speak to companies who've come to the StoryLab and haven't been successful, I think all of them will say that they've got a great deal out of that process. They've learnt more about where R&D fits within their business. They've learnt more about StoryFutures, and they've learnt more about National Gallery. So it's opened up opportunities for companies in many different ways. And we do recognize that it is a significant commitment out of your time, but that idea is then that you don't spend as much time developing a pitch or a proposal, that all the time in the work that you would put in perhaps over a couple of weeks to develop your pitch and proposal, you will do the majority of that work within the StoryLab day, and you'll have time to work with your company. It won't be all just presentations. You'll have time to work with your colleagues and develop your ideas, and have time on your own, as well as with listening to speakers and meeting with people. So it is a co-design workshop. It's the start of the journey, and we look forward to the end of the journey being a success with a new sort of co-design culture that has become really integral part of your business. And as the National Gallery said, it's really changed the direction from our first StoryLab with them to now. Co-design has become a big part of their process. I'm going to stop here, actually. I'll come back to the application process because I'd really like you to hear from one of our StoryLab companies, and that is Jonathan from Focal Point. So I'll hand over to Jonathan to talk to you exactly what his experience was in going through the StoryLab process. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Kylie. Pleased to be here and to be able to talk through our experience with StoryLab, which goes back some way. So again, if you'll all bear with me whilst I hopefully share the correct window on my screen. So hopefully everyone can see that. So my name's Jonathan Youth. I'm one of the founders and I head up Focal Point VR. We are, when we are in an office based in Guildford, just south of London. And I'd like to just spend the next 10 minutes or so walking through our experience with StoryLabs, from the lab itself through the project, the completion of the project, and sort of the follow-up. So as I said, our experience goes back now. I should look at the emails that started this back to November 2018. Just after the government announced the 80 million investment into the creative clusters that was touched on a little earlier. This led to the challenge itself in January 2019, and we did spend some time as a small company, we're only 6 people, debating whether or not it would make sense to invest probably half of our company time for 2 days in a process like this. And we made the judgment call that for a similar sort of project, we might spend a couple of weeks building documents and making formal proposals, and actually it would net out as a similar amount of effort for us to participate in what's ultimately a collaborative and competitive experience. And we thought it would also be a really interesting experience, which it turned out to be. So we dived in January, and I'll go through a little bit more detail of what was involved in the lab itself. I think it's probably worth saying that, well, let me move on to the next slide in that case. So talk about the lab itself. So we understood going into the lab in January at a high level what the goal of the challenge was, but we didn't go into the lab with any really solid preconceptions about what we would actually pitch. So part of the purpose of the event was to find the right idea through the cooperative development, brainstorming, etc., and then come up with a pitch, which we then made at the end of the lab itself. Our approach, which was to use wearable AR technology, and I think the picture you can see actually encapsulates our approach. It was put a headset on, an AR headset, and immerse yourself in a different space that united the picture, which you could see in front of you, with its origins. And Lawrence showed some video and images of the chapel in Italy where the painting originated. It's also worth noting that this was definitely an R&D project. This was an opportunity for us to enter into a project of some reasonable scale for a small company like ourselves, with some real uncertainty, probably in a way that we wouldn't be able to do with a more traditional commercial project. So there were some real unknowns, and whilst we were bringing together elements of technology that we were definitely familiar with, we were bringing them together in a way that we hadn't done before. So following the lab itself, a few weeks later, when we were notified that we were successful, there was a few weeks of sorting contracts out and scheduling the project. And then we moved into development itself. And this was a really multidisciplinary project. So I said it brings together lots of pieces of technology we were familiar with, but it was probably unusual in the number of different types of technology and components that we brought together to deliver the ultimate experience. So we started with a few weeks of planning, sorting out contracts and such like, and then moved into a creative period where we had a lot of support from the National Gallery and the StoryFutures team, both in terms of creation, in terms of story development and script development. We also got involved in setting up the right infrastructure to conduct audience research, which is something that we really hadn't done before with any of our projects. So that was a really interesting and useful new experience for us. And that moved into a period of iterative development where we were really prototyping, trying ideas out, trying them out in the gallery, because we could be physically present then, leading to deployment for a 2-week trial later in the summer. I think when James went through his earlier presentation, he talked about part of the goal of the R&D project being to look at how immersion worked with different types of headsets. So he showed an image of the mirror headset, which is what we started with, and you saw a picture of me kneeling in front of the painting with that headset on, and an Oculus Quest and a Magic Leap headset. This was not actually the intention at the start of the project. Our original concept was very much based on a single AR headset. And partway through the StoryLab, it became apparent that there were some limitations with that headset that could potentially be overcome by trying either a VR headset or a full 6 degree of freedom headset, in this case, the Magic Leap. And so that really speaks to the prototyping nature of the experience. So whilst this was probably the most challenging part of the project for us, we got great support from StoryLab in terms of having a relationship with Magic Leap and being able to provide equipment and also technical resource to add additional headsets to the development, and indeed unlocking some more funding because there was considerably more work to add 2 new headsets to the project. So again, something we wouldn't be able to do in a more traditional commercial engagement, and challenging, but we were really pleased that with StoryLab support and National Gallery support, we managed to get 3 headsets into the trial rather than the one we were originally planning for. So the back end of the summer, we went into a 2-week in-gallery trial, with the first week having the audience wearing AR headsets, so the mirror headset we started with and the Magic Leap headset, and the second week running a VR trial, fully immersive, with the Oculus Quest. And we were prototyping and tweaking the application and development right up to deployment, literally to within a few hours of going live. And it was really great to be able to stand back. I think I was actually sort of behind the photographer when this was taken, and watch people going through the experience in the gallery itself. And I think, as Carly said, StoryLab's a journey for us 2 and a bit years ago. We're still definitely on that journey. And there's a lot more to it than just completing the project and then drawing a line under it at that point. So post-event, the StoryFutures team put together a great report with lots of audience research and insight, and also recommendations for ongoing and future development. And I'm pleased to say that this is something where we still have a relationship with the National Gallery, and that's been fostered and supported by the StoryFutures team as well. We're certainly still taking a lot of the things that we learnt from the relatively short, sort of 4 or 5 month project into our business today. And I think looking back on it, we had an opportunity to try some ideas which would have been really hard to do in a traditional milestone-driven commercial engagement. That's the end of my presentation, so I can work out how to unshare the screen. I will do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was really interesting and much better explained, for having, very specific examples, much better explained the StoryLab process. I really appreciate it. We're going to now look a little bit more detail at the brief and at the application process, and then we've got some really great questions that I can see from everyone, which we'll hand over to. But I might just get James to speak, or to speak a little bit more detail about the brief.
Yeah, sure. I don't want to say too much, because I think actually probably the best thing is probably to start to delve into the questions. Maybe Libby, if you're able, you could just make sure we drop the link of the brief into the chat or the Q&A, wherever's best, so that we don't have to do any more screen sharing. I think the key thing with the brief is to ask questions during the situation we've got today. To know that overarching context that I talked about of, we're as interested in creating an experience whereby we can learn collectively about what's involved in making an experience that will play on location in the gallery and at home, and that can then be exported. Now that's ambitious, and that's going to frame a lot of what we think is possible and not possible as a prototype in this space. So the learnings that we're going to get from this, rather than trying to think about how you would create a completely finished product, are really important. And the other thing I'd say before we get into the Q&As is to reiterate what Kylie said at the start, is that the application at this stage isn't something where you should come up with a full idea of how you'd respond to the brief. We're after the application stage, initial ideas and ways of thinking, and how you might fit into this framework that we've outlined of working with a research collaboration for audience insight, for business models, for UX design, and for creative treatment of the brief. And that over the couple of days that you work with us and beyond, you'll get more opportunity to develop the idea. So those really are my key messages about the brief, rather than go through it in detail. I think we're better off if we now go into the Q&A, Carly, or do you want to talk about the application process?
I'll just quickly talk about the application process, which might answer a couple of questions, but then we'll go straight to questions, and I can chair everyone chair questions to the panel, and we'll get everyone on the panel to turn on their microphones and cameras very shortly. But I just wanted to go through a few key points on this. I'm saying this slide, and again, I don't think you can see my slide, so just a moment. So just to talk very quickly about the application process, we've covered that it's an online application. And I think the key things that we're looking for in the online application are pretty much defined by the questions, but they include the investment into the cluster, that it's not a final proposal, but an outline in your approach. So you might want to outline the technology or storytelling approach, a combination of both. And we're looking for experience, for you to demonstrate your experience in a few key areas, which include immersive storytelling, working with young audiences, because as you'll see on the brief, the audience is very young in this case, working in an international context and with stakeholders, your appetite for R&D, and that this is a good fit for your business. And the other thing I wanted to mention, I think that Jonathan covered it really clearly about the benefit of the 4-day workshop. And it really is a fantastic experience where you'll get to meet quite an extensive team across the National Gallery, with meet our Chinese partners, and meet all the StoryFutures team. So it will become clearer throughout that process how you can work with them and how you can include the R&D elements into your pitch, because you'll have a lot of opportunity to ask questions. It is, however, quite a challenging process that we normally do face-to-face. And with the digital environment, we are not doing the pitch. Usually it's very competitive. You have a 2-day workshop, and at the end of the workshop, 4 companies will pitch live to a judging panel their pitch that they've created across those 2 days. And that's what Focal Point did. It's quite intense, but we realized that you may need a little bit of time to process everything, a bit more time to ask questions that you haven't had. So there is a 7-day break between the end of the workshop and the pitching day, just to give you some extra time. We really don't want you to then use 7 days of your work time to develop everything, but just so you can clarify your thinking before you pitch. The other thing is that we're very fortunate, because of the challenging way that you're all operating and the challenging times, there is a StoryLab participant fee, which will help cover some of the time that you will commit across the 2-day workshop and through to the pitch. So, and that is all outlined in the brief. And when you apply, I'd also like you to draw your attention to looking at the sort of terms and conditions of your application, because if you're successful, they outline areas where you might have questions around IP and working with the National Gallery and working with StoryFutures and delivery and commitment, things like that. So that is all outlined in the application, but if you have any questions, let us know. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and go back to our questions to start to address them to the panel. Could I get all the panel to turn on their screens? Thanks so much. And also just to reiterate what Olivia said, I know it is a big project. We do expect that companies will want to collaborate. There are lots of individual collaborators with skills. There are lots of companies that are keen to partner up, because we don't expect necessarily one company will have the whole solution. And you may want to do that before the workshop, or you may want to do that as part of the process. So we can talk more about that in your questions. Okay, I'm just getting to the questions. Sorry. So Lawrence, could I address this question to you? There's going to be a lot of questions that are probably coming at you, but is the experience intended to be charged for either virtually or on location? And virtually or on location?
Don't know. I would say, I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a flippant answer. At this stage, I would say it isn't. I mean, obviously, it's part of the development process to go through. I think when we were working with Jonathan on the Veronese project, obviously the prototype we initially did was only for 2 weeks, but always with the intention of hopefully bringing it back for a further show and for further involvement. And as part of that discussion was always discussion about, well, are we charging for this or not? So I think at this stage, we genuinely wouldn't know. It's not a decision we would make at this point. I think during the prototype phase, probably not, but then what that leads on to is obviously a discussion that we'd had as part of the project.
And I mean, it reiterates again the process that these are things that you work collaboratively with the National Gallery. And we do talk about prototype or minimal viable product, but we, you know, it is a large budget that we will be working very hard to have something that's delivering and operational within the National Gallery. But we might be trialing your approach. You might be trialing a particularly innovative approach and seeing how that goes. Did you want to add something to that, James? Nope. Okay, great. Another question about, I think it was again, Lawrence, to you, and you mentioned your audience and social media. Across which platforms on social are your followers? Presumably your figure was consolidated across all your platforms.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment we're across Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and we're just embarking on looking at TikTok, which we haven't started yet. But yeah, so it's the usual, those three, and then YouTube separately.
Thank you. And there's a question, I'm going to direct this question at you, James, but both Jonathan and Lawrence might want to add something to this. And how this process works, James, which is what type of media will we have access to for creating the experience? Would it just be high-res photos? Will we have access to other things? Could we record our own laser scans, chromatic scans, etc.?
Good question. The answer in the StoryLab is that we'll have give you some access to agreed paintings that can be the focus for it. But these will be at that stage like low res scans that you can base ideas off. During the process of development, then essentially become very different relationships. I think Jonathan really talked about really nicely. It's a really different relationship to a client relationship that you have then with the gallery and with us. Is that we're there to take the StoryLab idea and then build it with you and work out what you need access to and work out what's the best way to make all of that happen. So the answer is, you know, be ambitious about what you want, and ask questions about specific things that you think you might need to achieve it as you go forward. If there are very specific things that you need, you can ask us offline beforehand. But I would suggest that at this stage, what you want to be is open and ambitious, and we'll work with you to take ambitious ideas forward. Lawrence, Jonathan, is that?
Yeah, if I can jump in on that. I mean, I guess, each time we do these type of projects, a constant question is kind of, what else do we have? Is it just the image that we have of the painting? Is there, but the gallery is it's a deep research institution as well, and it has lots of scientific research. So our knowledge of the paintings is really, really deep. Now that could mean that on some of our more well-known paintings, we've done more research than others. In the gallery, it's 2,300 paintings roughly, and so some of those we have more information than others. Increasingly, the way we take our photographs and what we do with them, and the type of scientific data we have, the way we scan things, is giving us much more rich information and new ways of telling stories. Whether that's behind the scenes, whether that's kind of hidden layers in the painting, whether that's right down to the pigment level. So there is a number of really interesting avenues to pursue, but that's not uniform across the collection, it would be said. So I think, again, it's all about the stories and being ambitious. I mean, this is a sort of 12-month project now, and we're constantly taking new photographs and constantly working with the conservators and, as I said, photography and scientific teams. So as the process goes along, if we need further access, then that's things that we can discuss. I mean, the scans that we did for the previous project on Veronese, because that was coming out of a research project that was already effectively happening, we did come to that particular project with those scans as part of the assets we were making available. But this time it is a different project. We're not coming to the table with those kind of level of assets, but it will depend on as the process goes along, and we can look at what we need to supply.
Yeah, and I would add to that there's you're looking at, your question is really specifically to what assets you might have to help you build the creative content, but there's also technical equipment and technical resources, and in many different ways, both the National Gallery and StoryFutures, wherever we can, support the production company in lots of different ways. Another project we're working on, we're currently doing some audience testing, and we have some kit which we're using, which includes phones. So we're sending out phones for AR testing, and that's all resources that we have that we add into your project. If we've got resources, both StoryFutures and the Challenge Setter tend to support you wherever we can. So we do talk a lot about the in-kind time and the opportunity that the access that you get. This project also has already been going for a year. So I just want to let companies know that they'll be bombarded at the start of the project with information. Our researchers have been working. We've had workshops with the National Gallery around what art and science means. So the National Gallery, as Lawrence outlined, there is an incredible depth of resource there for you to work with. So there is an interesting question, James, that I'll get you to answer. There's two questions which are very similar, and they're in line regards to our Chinese partners and how has our relationships been shaped with the Chinese partners so far. Where in Shanghai would the experience be deployed? What conversations we've had so far with the Shanghai Science and Museum Technology, what our Chinese partners will bring to the project.
Thanks, Carly. So the project is born out of, as I said at the outset, a collaboration between the AHRC and Shanghai's kind of district government for creating export and exchange opportunities between the UK creative industries and Shanghai. So it's supported at a high level. The project has been working with the Shanghai Science and Technology Museum, Foremost Media Group, and Tongji University as collaborators on the project. We are still at a stage where, because the innovation process that we run, that you're about to go through, is quite open-ended. And as Lawrence has really made clear, the National Gallery is open to quite a lot of different ways of interpreting what we're going to make. We're at the point where once we announce the winning company and the winning idea, it will be a more straightforward process to take forward our relationship with those organizations because of the way Chinese commissioning and audience research works. So the answer to that is we will work with the company to develop the idea with those partners to play out in those spaces. But it's very much like a case of we've got to work together on this. I can't give a one-size-fits-all answer. It's very much a case of we'll work together with those partners to make this happen. I think one of the big things that a year of partnership with those organizations has proved is not that we've not just spent a year doing partnership, but a year doing research with our research team doing I think we've done about 40 or 50 interviews with both UK companies and Shanghai companies and the museum and cultural authorities to look at what are both the barriers and opportunities to creating the kind of cultural and economic exchange that we're looking to achieve here. And the number one learning from all of that is that it's very slow. The biggest barrier is it's very slow. And what we're trying to do is de-risk that for the creative company by having spent a year building those relationships. And that year builds on 20 years of collaboration between Brunel University and Tongji, who are linking the project between the universities and into the gallery and the museum on both sides of the world. So that's, I think, it's both an answer that leaves me obviously a bit of kind of like wiggle room in the sense of like, we're going to work with you on it. But on the other hand, like the key thing is it is slow, it is a process of, there's a lot of cultural difference to negotiate and navigate. There's a lot of hierarchies and as I'm sure many of you will be, really aware of, there are a lot of kind of like international politics to navigate as part of it. So we've been doing quite a lot of that work for you and with you in order that creatively you can focus on the opportunity in hand, and business wise you can focus on the collaborations that we'll put at your doorstep. So I hope that helps. It's an exciting opportunity, but it's one in which, to go back to that experience that Jonathan talked through again, it's one in which you're all collaborators in this together. So we kind of work this together rather than clients master relationship.
Great, thanks, James. Will, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I think, Jonathan, you might be able to help this one as well. But Will is our Chief Creative Officer and also very heavily involved in this project. And by the nature of his title, creative is his speciality. So TJ, you've asked, would it be more beneficial to submit a number of creative responses to the brief in the relevant section of the application, or to bring one creative response fleshed out with some detail? So I'd like you, Will, to answer to that, but also, Jonathan, you commented on what you put in the application versus what you did in the StoryLab. So I might get you both to speak on that. Can I get you to go first, Will?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I think like anything really, when you think about the creative response, think about what you've heard from the stakeholders in question, think about who the audiences are. I've already seen in the chat, people are putting forward VR, and there's a chat about what sort of VR experience this might be. I'd ask you to carefully consider whether you think VR is actually a realistic way of delivering experiences to very young children. So, creative response, think about who it's for, think about what you've heard already. I think one of the things that you need to bear in mind is also, as James has touched on, it's R&D project. So think very hard about how what you're doing can be defined as R&D, and how it can help you when it comes to kind of company growth, and try and differentiate this sort of work from kind of business as usual. And this isn't really a kind of business as usual commission. So within that, the creative response, point out what you think you can deliver and what you think the core offer might be, and where the stretch might be, where the interesting area might be that sits possibly beyond what you could do, and where the R&D really adds benefit. Creative response, like anything really, really bottom out what we mean and who we're trying to reach.
Jonathan, did you want to reply as well? But I've also got a sort of additional question, which sits alongside that. Was the project focused on, in the Veronese's case, the painting from the start, or was this part of the StoryLab process? So can you talk about what the level of detail how you approach the application versus the StoryLab?
Yes, certainly. So let me take the second question first. With our StoryLab, then the painting was definitely identified. So the brief was very clearly take this painting with a bunch of research and assets which had already been created. So we had access ahead of the lab itself to some 3D scans of the chapel where the painting had originally hung. So we knew at the high level what we had to work with. The lab was really about working out how we used immersive technology to reunite or to unite the physical painting that we got to see in the gallery and the materials and the backstory and the history that we were briefed with. To move back to the first question, my gut feel would be you'd be better off approaching this with a core idea. And I think, as Will said, stretch is a good word. So I definitely wouldn't suggest that shotgunning 6 different approaches, saying we could do this, that, or the other, really makes any sense. I think listening and really understanding what the stakeholders have to say and what they're aiming for, was probably the most important thing that we did in the lab itself. So really understanding in this case what the curators and the team at the National Gallery were really trying to do was something which we only got through being in the lab itself and having a chance to ask questions and interact with them. So having that understanding allowed us to really hone and define a very specific response. But at the outset, I would probably say have a core idea and have some stretch goals, and then listen and evolve that.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's really helpful. And I just will add one more thing about the StoryLab process and honing your idea and the opportunities we provide you. For example, this is working with a young audience, and as part of the StoryLab, we always have the audience, a representative sort of focus group sample where companies can pre-pitch to the audience. And even in that process, companies change their ideas because they come with an idea. You will have an opportunity to pitch your idea to 5 groups of young children and see if it really does land. And then when you're talking in your pitch, you can say, well, one of our companies said we were going to do a board game and we've changed to a card game in the case of something we did recently, because of the feedback they got even at that last stage. So we're currently doing some schools research in conjunction with the National Gallery. We're holding workshops with schools and starting that process because it will be child-led or audience-led design, and they will be part of the whole StoryLab process in the StoryLab workshop and in the production build. We just don't think we can go a year creating something for an audience and then pop it in and see how it works, so to speak. So it is very much tested along the way. You might want to add in a moment to that, Lawrence, but we've got a lot of questions, so I'll keep going. And there are quite a lot of questions about research and IP, but there was something that added on to that I wanted to ask next. There's a lot of research questions, but just a quick question which follows up on what Will was saying about existing platforms. Can companies use existing platforms that they've built? And James, could you perhaps answer about IP rights? Yes.
Yeah.
Can.
As soon as I get to that mute button. Existing platforms, yes, you can use existing platforms. You just have to fit them within the innovation framework in the sense of show us what's going to be new and innovative about using them in this context. But that's what platforms are there for, absolutely. And secondly, then, in terms of IP rights, this question almost shows why I can't answer them this definitively, because the answer is it depends on what everybody's bringing to the party as to how the IP will be split. But the fundamental collaboration contract between the gallery and StoryFutures is to make sure that the SME gets an opportunity to develop new IP that it owns and can exploit properly. That's really crucial to our funding remit, and it's really crucial to the way the gallery want to work, because we're keen on showing how this sort of work at close to market R&D can lead to proper growth opportunities for companies. So neither the gallery, correct if I'm wrong, Lawrence here, but neither the gallery nor StoryFutures are as concerned with IP as we are concerned with a winning collaboration that all of us can benefit from. So it's very much a case of giving the SME the opportunity to develop something new by collaborating with us.
And Lawrence, in regards to story and assets and content again, there was a question around the brief mentions art and nature. Is this part of a specific upcoming curatorial or education program within the gallery, or is this theme more wider in its application?
No, it's wider, and the specific reason for that is that we don't want to tie this to our sort of exhibition program. This is tied closely to the permanent collection. And I think it's something where it is a theme that runs through, and we'll be working closely with the learning team to kind of look at that theme and look at kind of how that is manifesting itself across a number of works. And those works haven't been decided yet. We can apply to various ones in the collection. So, but yeah, I mean, the main thing to stress is that it's not tied to a particular thing that's happening in an exhibition program. This is tied to the permanent collection.
Yes, and it's tied to the permanent collection, not one painting. That's also important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting, and that's actually an interesting thing and a difference from the projects, in some of the projects that I highlighted, and also kind of the Veronese project. Previously, we've been looking at various digital projects have all centered around one painting, which is great because you can focus it and it becomes an immersive experience, and that's what we do. But the interesting thing about this is that we need something that's going to apply to more than one painting and kind of take that theme. So I think that is a big key difference for us with this particular project.
And this project is quite challenging in regards to the shifting environment that we're all working in. So that's why the StoryLab you'll have a lot more time to talk with Lawrence and his team around lots of things that are happening in the gallery. When the gallery was open, for example, there was a one-way movement system through the gallery that was new, and the gallery are looking at what elements of that they retain, how long they retain it for as we start to reopen again. So it is quite a challenging environment to work in, because a lot of things are changing due to our current situation, which is challenging. I did have one more question for you, Lawrence, around, are there any particular challenges around engagement with audience that you, the National Gallery, are looking to explore, understand and solve?
There's nothing particular that we've got as part of the objectives at the moment. I think there is a constant question of, which was part of the Veronese project as well, is the use of technology on the gallery floor. People can come into the gallery and use mobile phones. That was something that changed quite a few years ago. That's something that become the norm. Veronese involved trying to work out, what does it mean when you put a headset, very practical thing. What happens when you put a headset experience in front of the painting? These rooms are open for everyone to come, and it's free access in our permanent collection. So people are moving around the space. Someone wants to stand in front of the painting. What happens if you create that sort of mini barrier, which we did with having a headset experience in front of the painting and testing that? And so that was always all a useful exercise. I think that is part of the challenge in those spaces, is kind of, if you're going to use technology, if you're going to give people something, it's the practical elements of how do you distribute that technology. Is it something that you bring yourself? Is it something that's on a personal mobile phone? Especially, I suppose, if we're looking at that audience of 7 to 11-year-olds, they're often probably not going to have their phone. They're not going to have their own phone, or they probably will, but a lot of them won't have their own phone. So it's using someone else's, or it's using some form of distributed technology. And I think those are the key challenges that need to be addressed.
Great. So there are questions around, did you have a particular location within the gallery that you're looking at?
Yeah, I saw that one. Not at the minute. I mean, the gallery is, I mean, you can see my website in terms of the layout if you haven't been there, but it's actually quite a challenging space to navigate. I mean, as you hinted at, Kylie, it's been very interesting during reopening and the sort of processes we put in place for reopening, in terms of creating routes through the gallery, which we never had. And we, for the most recent opening, we have 3 different routes that visitors have to take. That's something, as we approach another reopening, we'll be keeping in place. What that means when we're in full mode of being totally open to the gallery again, what does that mean? Are we going to keep those? They're things we haven't actually answered yet. But in terms of the spaces, I mean, that kind of will be dictated about thinking about the journey as a whole, I guess, because if we're taking more than one painting, that painting could exist. At the moment, the gallery doesn't have a chronology of kind of paintings. It sort of does, but sort of doesn't at the same time. It's not sequential rooms, for example. So all those navigation challenges, thinking about the on-site experience, will need to be addressed. How do you take someone from a gallery that's in one side of the gallery that might be then thinking about an impressionist painting, which is completely over the other side of the gallery? So how you get people to travel through the space, navigate, will become crucial as part of this project. And we've looked at that at various projects before, but I think this would be a really interesting one to tie that navigation to.
And there's one other one for you. I want to come back to many of the research questions because it is important. But just while we're talking about storytelling, someone asked, are you interested in retelling the stories of the artistic work from a different lens? I pause there because it does also go on to say than the colonial viewpoint, and is it a worthwhile collaborative proposal to pursue? And I do think that's an interesting question, but particularly about in relation to art and nature and science, art and science with the nature context. So while the colonial point of view might be less relevant, the art, we just have to focus when you have a look at the brief, you'll start to see that there is a strong focus on art and science, and that can mean many different things. And you companies may have some ideas about that. But do you have any comment on that question, Lawrence?
It's a great question. I think it's one that we're constantly thinking about. And I think, Will might want to jump in about the process of storytelling. And I think that's working closely with us on stories. What story are we trying to tell, and from what particular angle? I think we're moving, as kind of all what I've said, is kind of working towards more collaboration and thinking hard about audiences and working closer with audiences. That then goes to how are you telling the story of the paintings? And some of these paintings have, quite simplistic stories, and others don't. Some have some complicated stories and complicated histories and complicated provenance. And I think that's where the selected company will have to work very closely with them, with our curatorial teams and our educational teams, to sort of think about those stories if they are difficult to tell, or have a connection to something that's difficult to tell, and present in the right way for that audience that we're talking about, of 7 to 11-year-olds. So I think it's the simple answer is that we're increasingly interested in other viewpoints and hearing other voices about an interpretation and engagement with the paintings.
And there has to be some also consideration of the Chinese component of this, because we often talk about that. There may be use of different content for the UK market versus the Chinese market, because in the case of the Chinese market, they obviously have some concerns around religious stories in some cases, or nudity in paintings for young audiences, and other things that are not as much of an issue here. So there's a whole cultural overlay that we also will discuss and bring to the project, but these are not things you have to have the answers for immediately. Sorry, you look like you were going to say something, Will.
No, I'm just endorsing Lawrence's what Lawrence is saying, really, and it's interesting to get Jonathan's perspective as well a bit, which is, it is called Story Futures for a reason. The narrative element and the storytelling element of all of this is the thing that I think is we know that immersive technologies will lead to all forms of interesting kind of economic growth, right? But the bit that I think we're interested in is that IP story, that idea of generating a story, generating something that where you see the sweet spot between the technology and what storytellers can do with it. And in this specific area, it's talking to two potential quite substantial growth markets, right? It's talking about export, it's talking about huge opportunity in China. And potentially it's also, I think it's also alluding to this landscape that's growing now around kind of educational experience. And I think that's also a really, really interesting market, right? So we're talking about two fascinating growth experiences, and story and that creative practice sits at the heart of both of them.
Thanks. I'm very conscious of time because we're getting to the end of the time, and I can see that there's still a lot of questions we haven't got to, and I will definitely make sure that we follow up with each of the questions. There was just something more on research, several questions about how learning is captured and shared, evaluation methodologies. I saw another one there on research, and the only other thing is about judging applications and in-kind contribution that may be important. If we can do a quick response to those two questions, James. But could I get you to answer about research first?
I think let me answer about the other bit first, and then come
Okay.
back to the research bit. Sorry, you'll need to repeat the research bit because I focused on the other bit of the question. I think just in terms of the in-kind bit, the important part is the in-kind bit is something that I think Jonathan's answer at the start is where you need to start from. Jonathan and all the companies who participate in StoryLab, the first thing to go is, okay, this is going to be 3 days of development time to try and win this pitch. And when Jonathan worked that out, as most of our collaborators do, you go, actually, that's sort of okay compared to how else it might be. We've obviously given you a bit longer to do some development time this time, so that you've got some paid development time, not much, but just to recognise that there is something in there. The opportunity to develop new IP is then the other part of this, that we're then looking for companies to invest in the experience themselves. That does not mean cash investment of your own company's cash. It means working with us during the StoryLab to identify where sometimes you might charge a margin that you can't on this type of funding. So the funding can absolutely cover your costs, but you might sacrifice a margin or a profit line in order to invest in the R&D. And that's a really normal way that our companies collaborate with us on this. Or, for example, somebody else earlier on about, can you use an existing platform? Yeah, you can, and you might usually charge a client a fee as part of your production margin for using that platform. And in this instance, we'd expect you to waive that fee. So the key is we need to be able to, show that this is a collaboration, that we are all making an investment in this together, but that we recognise that the company who's got the most difficult investment to make is the SME, which is why it's the smallest amount in terms of the collaboration. There's much more money and staff time on the table from the gallery and ourselves. But to make it meaningful, there has to be something where you're either sacrificing a margin, investing IP, not charging a particular line that you might normally charge against. And we'll work with you both during the StoryLab and immediately after to go into the detail of that. In the short term, I'd suggest that companies think about two things. One is the investment in time that we've outlined about the StoryLab process worth it for the kind of opportunity that we've talked about of working with a gallery and working internationally? Obviously, we think it is. And secondly, that then as long as you come into it going, okay, I'm not going to be able to charge a margin on this. I need to see the whole production as not something that is a profit-making exercise, but a development opportunity for the company. If you go into it with that, then you're not going to have any problems.
And I mean, I'd like to reiterate that how the StoryLab process works across the production. It is a very time-consuming exercise. I think Jonathan would agree. And I'd just like to add that with the international aspect and the COVID, working in COVID conditions, where a lot of the in-kind commitment comes is in time. It is quite a challenging environment, and everything is taking a lot more time. But I can see that from productions that, I work closely with people that are producing television productions and doing schedules, that it's double what they normally need. So, and you would all be experiencing that in order to keep the communication up. I keep saying a lot of that we would make a lot more progress if we could visit China and have face-to-face discussions. And that is exactly the same. We're doing a collaborative R&D innovation process, and if we got in our audio studio or our lab, or if we got with you for a day, we might solve something that might take a lot more time. I am conscious that we've just hit the time. Is there anything? My question was about research, James. A couple of people asked about evaluation methodologies, capturing the research and how we do that. And I thought it might just be worthwhile ending on our research, how working with us and how we support a lot of that process before we go. And I'll let you answer that. And then other people, I do see some very specific questions that we will get back to you directly on. We'll save the questions and respond to you.
So how do we get the data to look at it is multi-method. because there are 3 different research strands in the project itself. We have a UX design aspect, and the kind of evaluation of that will be linked to the second aspect, which is audience research, which will be gathered via both survey and qualitative methodologies, either on site or remotely as part of it. And then we use a mixture of psychologically tested and validated tools for our methods, and simply kind of like crunching the data across hundreds of interviews and hundreds of survey results to look at the outcomes. That kind of like on a high level. The important thing about it is the research questions themselves will produce answers. We might not all like some of the answers, but they will produce answers, and that will produce new knowledge. And in producing the new knowledge, we'll find new ways of kind of like exploring the issue. And that's part of the innovation remit, is we're not necessarily like, we talk about KPIs sometimes, but they're our goals of not like success or failure. They're areas that we're interested in measuring, and there's no point necessarily setting up a big target that we go, oh, we've succeeded or we failed, because actually there'll probably be bits of both in the process. And hopefully at the end it's more success than failure, but the innovation journey itself will be really rewarding.
And I'd just like to add that the research and development is not just StoryFutures or the National Gallery. The lead on what the National Gallery wants to achieve, and you are the production company helping the National Gallery to engage with their audiences and achieve something out of this, but you will have your own research and development questions as part of your business. Will this help your business grow? Can you offer these opportunities in different ways? Could you charge for these? So the question about charging is, not just can National Gallery, will they charge for it, but maybe you want to answer those questions yourself as well. So we do the R&D it's everybody's R&D, and it is also supposed to be integral to supporting your business to grow. So on that positive note, because I think it is all about growth, your business growth, the growth of the National Gallery's business, and the growth of using these innovative technology and storytelling forms in the future to make us all some more money, because then that is part of what it's all about. And develop skills which lead to more production. So I'm going to end it there, everybody. I really appreciate the time you've given up, Lawrence, and the National Gallery's commitment to this project. And in terms of time, it's incredible the access and opportunity to the gallery you're providing as a challenge setter here. And we're really appreciative and great to kick off the journey. Everyone will have lots of questions. Olivia and I are here to answer your questions specifically about your application. The applications do close on Sunday night, midnight Sunday night. Monday morning, we'll be plowing through them. So, and there's some specific questions about how we manage that process. I'm happy to answer you directly. So thanks again, everyone. I find this part really difficult, but like to end there, say goodbye, and please do follow up with us. Olivia has a form I would like to reiterate. She will email everyone at the end of this. And if you are looking for collaborators or want to put yourself out there as someone who wants to work on this project, but you need more partners, please use her contact form. That information will then be available to other participants who came today. So thanks very much. Thank you, everyone. And Jura, who's running the webinar, I'll get you to close now. Thanks so much, everyone.